Why are people afraid of food? So we went through all the healthcare, the science, the published research, and all that, and how much trouble that can get us into. But now let's talk specifically why people are actually afraid of food. And that is because of calories. The calories in, calories out model. That's why. We have all, and everyone here, every one of my Clovis clients, you all came to me on day one. I know where you were at. Never forget that shit. Remember where you come from. I remember where I come from. And every single one of you is probably still afraid of food and was terrified of food when you got to me. This is because of the calories in, calories out model. That's why. We blindly accepted that eating less, just blanket statement, eating less calories is the way to better health. But I can tell you, again, I have worked with over 1,500 clients in just the last 2 years alone. Every single one was malnourished. Every single one has been malnourished, I assure you, with 100% certainty. Overfed, perhaps, yes, probably actually eating too many total calories, overfed, perhaps, but extremely malnourished because their entire lives, they have been following doctor's orders of the food pyramid. And then when they decide they want to get healthy, the only way they know how to do that is to eat less food overall. So I was eating the food pyramid, probably eating too many calories, sure, but I was eating the food pyramid and I was fat, sick, and nearly dead. Then I decided to get healthy. So I just decided all food minimized. I'm just going to eat less food, blanket statement. Now what happens is using the food pyramid, the majority of your daily caloric intake is already processed grains and refined starches and all these things, right? Then you also reduce the overall amount of food eaten. And this is now a deadly combination because it ensures that you are under eating and malnourished. Because now easily over 70% of what you are eating is processed foods with virtually no nutrients, and you're not eating enough food overall. So this is now compounding malnourishment, lack of total food, and also massive lack of total nutrients. This is terrible, okay? Because why? What are nutrients? Talk about nutrients all the time, macronutrients, micronutrients, those pesky little buggers that are responsible for every single activity in every single cell of the entire human body. Could be just a little bit important, don't you think? But we're afraid of them. Eat less of them. That's good for you, right? Here's how this happened. I'm going to introduce a term to you that you may have heard me use. And also, I will shout out to Rob Wolf. I freaking love Rob Wolf. The dude's amazing. And he was the first one that introduced me to this particular term, and I love it. So let's make sure I can spell correctly. Spelling test, Justin. This term is a species-appropriate diet, okay? So we're going to talk about a species-appropriate diet. Now I'm going to outline this with longevity studies and something called rodent chow. So if you've read books like Lifespan by David Sinclair or any of the biohacker books or whatever on longevity, or listen to podcasts or whatever, these longevity researchers, they have a theory about extending lifespan in humans. When they have a theory about extending lifespan in humans, they will test it in animals, namely lab mice. Now, this is a good bet because about 99% of genes in humans actually have counterparts in mice. We're not 99% identical. I think there's only about maybe 80% of those genes that are actually identical, and then a few of those are, anyway, 99% genes in humans have counterparts in mice. So researchers will test things like high fat versus high carb, total caloric intake, fasting, intermittent fasting, on and on and on, all these different things on mice. But the kicker is, here's what nobody thinks about and nobody tells you. These studies all use something called rodent chow for food. So I promise you, nobody is going out in nature and gathering the exact foods that wild mice would eat scurrying through the forest, and they're not creating an environment similar to the environment they would be in out in the forest. Nothing about this is natural. Now there's a guy named Matthew Ritchie. Matthew Ritchie is the science director of Research Diets, Inc. This is a company that literally designs and sells food for lab animals. His entire job is creating the food that lab animals eat. And this guy stated, quote, "In rodent chow, there's corn and wheat and soy and oats and animal fat from sometimes sources you don't know. There are phytoestrogens, heavy metals. There could be pesticides," end quote. What? Corn, wheat, soy, oat, chemicals, pesticides, phytoestrogens. Sounds to me that this is exactly what mice would be eating if they were living in nature, right? Sarcasm. Got it. Now, another expert, Craig Warden, who studies the genetics of body fat accumulation at the University of California, Davis, stated that of 35 papers that involved feeding mice a high-fat diet, only 5 used controlled diets that were identical, save for their fat versus carbohydrate ratio. He went on to say, quote, more often than not, the authors do not provide information about diet composition in the paper, and even worse, do not provide enough information for me to determine diet composition by myself, end quote. And again, another guy, one of the most famous scientists of all time, Richard Feynman, stated, quote, a laboratory mouse lives on carbohydrates. Their normal diet is not like a normal diet for humans, end quote. Now, on top of this, when we talk about these high-fat studies, high-fat rodent chows are created for mice usually using hydrogenated vegetable oils to up the calories from fat. Hydrogenated vegetable oils are known carcinogens, cancer-causing agents, also known to significantly impact epigenetics in animals. Again, seems like a good option for studying health in animals, right? Again, sarcasm, kind of my thing. As you can see, not a scrap of food being fed to these lab mice, not a scrap, even remotely resembles any food that they would ever consume in nature, ever, AKA a species appropriate diet. This is not a species appropriate diet. You cannot study health without a species appropriate diet. It doesn't make any sense. Okay? So not only that, I would argue that everything they're feeding these mice is straight up toxic. It's actively damaging their metabolism and killing them. And this is only talking about the food ingested, okay? So this says nothing about the environment, the fact that they're not running around in the woods, they're not digging holes and scurrying through tunnels, they're not getting dirt all over their face, eating dirt, drinking spring water. The microbiome of these lab mice could not be more different from mice in a natural environment. This is insane. But what has been the result of all this lab mice data? Well, the result is scientists from around the world for decades have been preaching caloric restriction will increase our lifespans significantly. Just eating less calories, blanket statement, will, without a doubt, increase our lifespans significantly, while citing nothing but lab mice and worm studies. And if there's one thing in nutrition that nobody is questioning right now, again, this dogmatic belief, is that eating less is unquestionably good for us. And I think it's nonsense. I reject it outright. And hey, this is just my opinion, and I'm going to try to convince you of my opinion right now. That's what I do here. But I'm going to explain my reasoning. I'm going to call this a rodent study thought experiment, okay? So I'm just going to do a thought experiment that I'm making up here. And I want to be clear. I want this to really make sense for you. So I'm going to use really simple numbers just for the sake of argument. These numbers make no sense, but they'll make sense in the context of humans, but they won't make sense in the context of mice because you would never need to feed a mice this much food. But I'm using people numbers for calories so that the example will feel similar to you, okay? So here's what we're going to talk about. We have 2 mice in this imaginary study. So mouse number 1 gets 2,000 calories per day for its entire life. Mouse number 2 gets 1,500 calories per day for its entire life. Now, let's say at the end of this study, mouse number 2 increases lifespan by 15%. Mouse number 2, all things controlled for, the same genes in the mice or whatever you want to do. A lot of times they actually control for their gut microbiome. They make a false synthetic gut microbiome, right? So mouse number 1 gets 2,000 calories. Mouse number 2 gets 1,500 calories and lives 15% longer. So what happens here? Hooray! Everybody celebrates. This is a massive success. This is incredible. A giant breakthrough in the field of longevity. CNN, headlines, boom, here we go. And nobody seems to think about the fact that these mice are eating a diet that is 100% toxic sludge. 100% toxic sludge. So what did this test actually prove? Did this test prove that eating less is beneficial, or did the test just prove that eating less fucking toxic sludge is beneficial? What? What is it? Okay, so less calories equals beneficial? Or is it simply less toxins equals beneficial? Which one? How do you do a study like that and decide that it's the total calories that have anything to do with what has happened here? How? How do we not see this? How do the brightest minds in the world not tell you this? And then issue blanket statements like caloric restriction will make you live 15% longer, right? I think you see my point here. And the problem is, once you see it through this lens, you can never unsee it. Trust me. I wish you could walk around in my mind for one day what it's like for me walking around in standard society. Once you see this stuff, you cannot unsee it. And everything you've ever learned about nutrition starts to unravel. And every time somebody talks to me about counting calories, my soul dies a little bit, right? So I want to touch again on environment briefly. There was another study done, I probably talked about this as I know I have. There was another study done about the addictiveness of cocaine. So they took these mice and they put them in a cage, and they gave them food and water. There was a water dispenser. There was a liquid cocaine dispenser. And what happened? Well, the mice hit the liquid cocaine dispenser over and over until they died. The headlines were conclusive. Cocaine is so addictive, animals will choose it over food and water until they die, all right? Those are the headlines, blanket statements. One brilliant researcher saw through the absurd holes in this test, and he set up a new one. What he did was he built essentially Rodent Disneyland. Built a beautiful environment with that rodent dreams are made of, right? There's plenty of other mice to play with. There's spinning wheels and mazes and activities to pass the time, abundant food and water, and of course the cocaine dispenser. Now what happened in this next study? Well, what happened was the mice hit the cocaine dispenser once and then never ever went back to it again. So again, what did this study prove? Did the study prove that cocaine is so addictive that everybody will choose it over food? Or did they just prove that cocaine seems like a really good idea when you are suicidally depressed because you live in the worst possible environment with no contact with other creatures? This would be like putting a human in solitary confinement for years, promising them that they will never see another human again as long as they live, and then handing them enough cocaine to overdose on. It does not take a brilliant person to see how this stuff is happening, everybody. Really? Let's think about this. So if we move on to human studies, I want to dig into where we've gotten into trouble in human studies. I'm running out of time here.